When we last left off, we'd actually finished our series on the Shecemite Androcide. However, this is a bonus episode on the Shecemite Androcide. This is a special what if video. In this video, I seek to show the full impact of what Jacob's sons had done when they wiped out the Shechemites. And I also want to provide an alternative ending to the story to answer the question, what if Shechem and Dinah had actually gotten married? Hello and welcome to Bible Wars. I'm your host, Knight Jake. Now, during the series on the Shecemite Androcide, I touched on a number of points concerning the possible outcomes of a marriage between Shechem and Dinah. And in this video, I will recap them as I mention what life would have been like if Dinah and Shechem had actually gotten married. Firstly, Hamor had offered that the two nations, or two tribes, would actually become one. They would share the land and their livestock. The Israelites could take wives from the Shechemites, and the Shechemites could take wives from the Israelites. The two tribes would essentially become one tribe. This deal would have greatly benefited the Israelites. Not only would have they received a selection of eligible young women to marry, and increased their own flocks, but they would have also gained plenty of land to live on. See, God had promised Abraham the land of Canaan. But to this very day, the Israelites had very little land that they actually owned. The only property was the burial plot that Abraham had purchased as a family tomb, and the land that Jacob had purchased from the Shechemites to graze on. By uniting with the Shechemites, the Israelites would have been receiving much more land. And not only land, but they would have received a fortified city. We are not exactly sure how big the city of Shechem was in Jacob's day, but the fact that it had a city gate meant that it also had a city wall. Thus, it was a well-protected, fortified city. The Israelites would no longer need to live in tents among their sheep. They could live in actual houses inside a fortified city. The second benefit for the Israelites would have been both royalty and nobility. See, Shechem was the prince of the city and the future king. If Dinah had married him, then she would become his future queen. Her children, the grandchildren of Jacob, would become the future kings of Shechem, meaning that an Israelite would have been seated on the throne of Shechem. Jacob also had 12 sons, only 11 at this point as Benjamin had not yet been born. The women who married them would have belonged to Jacob's family. In a generation or two, the Israelites would have made up a majority of the population of the city, especially as God continued to bless them with large groups of children. In the book of Ruth, we hear that Judah's son Perez is mentioned as having a lot of offspring. In addition to all this, as Jacob and his sons were the father and brothers of Dinah, the future queen, they would have become nobility within the city. Now, the third benefit for the Israelites is that their religion would have been the religion of the city. The women of Shechem who married the Israelites would need to convert and worship the God of Jacob. But in addition to this, Shechem had converted the city to Jacob's God. Jacob's son had requested that Shechem and the city be circumcised. This was more than just a physical act. Circumcision was a covenant between God and his people. By circumcising themselves and by marrying the Israelites, the Shechemites were actively converting to the God of Jacob. Most likely, the people would have only been nominal converts, converting only for financial benefits from the uniting two tribes. Even Shechem was most likely nominal, only converting for the sake of his wife. However, his love for Dinah was a deep and self-sacrificial love, and in time he may have actually become a true believer. Therefore, if the Israelites hadn't killed the Shechemites. They could have become nobles over a fortified city filled with people who worshipped their god, while their sister could have become the queen of that city. Instead, they gave all of this up and became a stench to the people of Canaan by killing the Shechemites. On top of all this, it is important to note that Dinah's brothers actually made her life worse. Now, many people today wouldn't realize this. They'd simply read that Shechem raped Dinah, and that's the end of the story for them. Like Dinah's brothers, many people would write Shechem off as an evil person, not worthy of forgiveness and worthy only of death. Many modern people find it outrageous that the Bible would even consider that a rape victim would be married to a rapist. However, many people fail to take into consideration the culture of that time and place. Firstly, the rape victim would only marry the rapist if her father permitted it, and any good father would only permit such a marriage if he truly believed that the rapist was repentant and actually going to look after his daughter. Secondly, the Israelites lived in a shame-based culture, which was very close, and the neighbours were very watchful of whatever happened around them. The rapist would be under a very close watch. If he did anything to harm that woman, then he would be strictly punished. Thirdly, the rapist was forbidden from divorcing the rape victim. Thus, the woman could be as horrible to him as she wished, and he was forced to still look after her. And fourthly, this was actually beneficial for the woman. In that day and age, rape was a great shame, and no man would desire this woman ever again. She either married her rapist or she remained unmarried, which, in a culture where women couldn't work, meant that she either lived with her father or brothers or she became homeless. Therefore, if Dinah married Shechem, he would be responsible for looking after her for the rest of her life, unable to harm her or to divorce her. In addition to all this, she would eventually become queen of the city and live out the rest of her life in luxury. In addition to all that, while Shechem was originally only lusting after Dinah, he grew to love her and desperately tried to amend the wrong that he had done. Shechem basically repented of his sin before Jacob and his sons. He pleaded with them for Dinah's hand in marriage, and he was willing to give them anything they wanted. He basically converted to Dinah's religion for her, and not just himself, but his entire city. Shechem did do a wicked, horrible thing. Don't get me wrong. But he was truly sorry for his actions, and he truly loved Dinah with his whole heart and soul. He was prepared to look after her for the rest of his life. By killing Shechem, Simeon and Levi ruined the life of their sister, based on the fact that Shechem had done what the brothers asked, and that Dinah was living in his house when the brothers arrived. It appears that they may have already been husband and wife. Therefore, Simeon and Levi actually killed their brother-in-law and made their sister a widow. And by killing Shechem, they left her to be a desolate woman, and now they were responsible for looking after her. Shechem and Dinah may have started their relationship in a horrible situation, but it had eventually turned into a benefit for Dinah. She could have lived out her days in luxury as queen of the city with a loving, devoted husband who had 12 brother-in-laws making sure that he looked after her properly. Instead, she had to live out the rest of her days as a widow, being looked after her brothers and living in a tent amongst sheep. If the Israelites had allowed Shechem and Dinah to get married, the two nations both would have benefited. They would have lived together as one nation, under one religion, in a safe city with plenty of wealth and livestock. And instead, the Israelites made themselves a stench in the nose of the surrounding nations. And this brings to an end our What If episode concerning the possibility of a unification between the city of Shechem and the tribe of Israel. Thank you for watching this episode of Bible Wars. If you enjoy the Bible Wars YouTube series, or any of the other work done by the Order of Knight George, you can support us by going over to our Patreon page. I'll leave a link to our Patreon page in the description below. Goodbye, and God bless.